The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. After 200 years of slow expansion, Earth's united colonies had built homes on 47 different worlds. It was not much compared to the ancient empires that ruled the galaxy, but humans were proud of what they had achieved. They had come so far from the small blue planet where their journey began. The Empire was the most powerful force in the Orion arm of the galaxy. They controlled 3,000 star systems. Their warships numbered in the millions. They had ruled without challenge for over 10,000 years. Every species they encountered either submitted to their rule or was destroyed. There was no middle ground. There was no negotiation. They believed they were superior to all other beings, and they had the power to prove it. When they discovered humanity, they sent a simple message to Earth: submit or be destroyed. The leaders of Earth discussed their options for many days. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to run and hide in the far corners of space, but most believed there had to be another way. They chose to send a diplomat to speak with They chose peace. Ambassador Daniel Porter was selected for this important mission. He was 52 years old, a calm and patient man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had spent his whole life solving problems through words instead of weapons. He had ended conflicts on 12 different human colonies. People said he could find common ground between any two enemies. If anyone could convince the two to accept humanity as friends instead of slaves, it was Daniel Porter. His wife begged him not to go. She held his hands and looked into his eyes with tears running down her face. She told him they could not be trusted. She told him she had a bad feeling about this mission, but Daniel kissed her forehead and promised he would return. He always kept his promises. Their daughter Emma was 17 years old. She was a strong girl with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn spirit. She hugged her father at the spaceport and made him promise to send messages every week. Daniel laughed and agreed. He did not know it would be the last time he would ever hold his daughter. The diplomatic ship Horizon carried Daniel and 12 other diplomats across the vast darkness of space. The journey took 6 weeks through slipspace corridors that bent the fabric of reality. Daniel spent the time studying everything humanity knew about He learned their language. He studied their customs. He read about their history. He wanted to understand them so he could find a way to connect with them. When the Horizon arrived at Prime, Daniel stood at the observation window and stared in wonder. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Their cities covered entire continents, towers of crystal and metal reaching toward the sky. Massive space stations formed glowing rings around the planet. Warships moved through the darkness like schools of silver fish, more ships than Daniel could count. They themselves were tall and elegant beings. They stood almost 8 feet high with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. Their eyes were large and shifted color depending on their mood. When they were calm, their eyes were soft green. When they were angry, their eyes turned deep red. Daniel noticed that most eyes turned orange with curiosity when they looked at him. He took this as a good sign. High Sovereign the Eternal received the human delegation in his throne room. It was the largest indoor space Daniel had ever seen. The ceiling was so high that clouds actually formed beneath it. The walls were covered in gold and precious gems. Thousands of nobles stood watching as the small group of humans walked toward the throne. Daniel approached with respect but without fear. He had brought gifts from Earth. There were beautiful paintings created by human artists. There were recordings of human music from every culture and time period. And there was a small olive tree grown from seeds that had traveled to space and back. The olive branch had been a symbol of peace on Earth for thousands of years. Daniel bowed his head slightly and spoke in the language. His pronunciation was not perfect, but the effort showed respect. The court murmured in surprise. No other species had ever bothered to learn their tongue. "We come seeking friendship," Daniel said. His voice was steady and clear. "Humanity desires peace with the Empire. We are young among the stars. We are small compared to your great civilization. But we believe we have much to offer as partners rather than subjects. We offer our creativity, our determination, and our friendship. High Sovereign studied the human with eyes that shifted from orange to yellow to green. He was intrigued despite himself. This small creature spoke with dignity and courage. Most species trembled before the throne. This human stood tall. "You speak boldly for a species that controls so few worlds," said. "What makes you believe you deserve to stand as anything other than servants?" Daniel smiled. "We do not claim to be equals in power, High Sovereign, but history has taught humanity that true strength comes from cooperation, not domination. Empires built on fear eventually crumble. Partnerships built on respect can last forever. We offer you something more valuable than another conquered world. We offer you genuine allies." The negotiations continued for 3 weeks. Daniel worked tirelessly, meeting with officials from morning until night. He found allies among the younger members of the court, those who were curious about humanity and tired of endless conquest. Slowly, carefully, he began to build something that had never existed before, a framework for peace between humans and trade agreements were drafted. Cultural exchanges were proposed. Some nobles even expressed interest in visiting Earth. Daniel sent messages to and Emma, telling them the mission was succeeding beyond his wildest hopes. He told them he would be home soon. But not everyone in the empire wanted peace. War Minister had built his entire career on conquest and violence. He commanded the military, and peace would make him irrelevant. He watched Daniel Porter with growing hatred. This simple human was threatening everything valued. On the 23rd night of negotiations, went to see the High Sovereign in his private chambers. His eyes were deep red with anger. "These humans are dangerous," warned, "not because of their weapons. Their ships are weak, their technology is primitive, but their ideas are poison. They speak of partnership and equality. If we accept their terms, our subject species will demand the same treatment. The empire will collapse from within." Listened carefully. He had begun to respect Daniel Porter, but's words touched on fears the High Sovereign had never fully dismissed. The empire had always ruled through strength and fear. What would happen if that fear disappeared? "What do you suggest?" asked quietly. His eyes glowed bright red in the darkness. "Let me show the galaxy what happens to those who dare to negotiate with the as equals." That night, soldiers came to the human diplomatic quarters. Daniel was dragged from his bed and taken to the great plaza where executions had been performed for thousands of years. There was no trial. There were no charges. The other diplomats were forced to watch. As the sun rose over Prime, Ambassador Daniel Porter was executed before the imperial court. His body was displayed as a warning. The remaining members of his team were killed shortly after. The horizon was destroyed as it tried to escape. A single message was sent to Earth. The words were simple and cruel. Humanity will submit or humanity will burn. They expected terror. They expected immediate surrender. They expected humans to fall to their knees and beg for mercy. They had made a terrible mistake. The news reached Earth 3 weeks after the massacre. The images were broadcast on every screen across every human world. Billions of people watched in horror as Ambassador Daniel Porter, a man who had dedicated his life to peace, was murdered for the crime of asking for friendship. Porter was at home when she saw the footage. She collapsed on the floor and screamed until her voice broke. Her neighbors heard her cries and came running, but there was nothing they could do. Her husband was gone. The man who had promised to come home had been taken from her forever. Emma Porter watched the same footage in her school. The teachers tried to turn off the screens, but it was too late. Emma saw her father standing proud and unafraid in his final moments. She saw the soldiers surrounding him. She saw the moment the light left his eyes. Something changed inside Emma that day. The kind and gentle girl she had been died alongside her father. Something harder and colder took her place. In the chambers of the United Colonial Senate, the most powerful leaders in human space sat in stunned silence. Many of them had argued for caution. Many of them had counseled patience with the. Now they understood the truth. They did not want peace. They wanted slaves, and they would kill anyone who suggested otherwise. President Maria Santos stood before the assembly. She was 62 years old, a former colony administrator who had risen through the ranks by solving impossible problems. She had gray hair tied back in a simple style, and her face showed the weight of what she was about to say. When she spoke, her voice carried no trace of fear. "The Empire has made its position clear," she said. "They believe humanity will kneel because we are small. They believe we will surrender because we are afraid. They have murdered our ambassador. They have murdered our citizens. They have demanded our complete submission." She paused and looked across the sea of faces before her. Senators, admirals, scientists, and diplomats all watched her with grief and anger in their eyes. "They have made a terrible mistake," she continued. "We will not kneel. We will not submit. We will show the Empire what happens when you push humanity to the edge. We will make them regret the day they killed Daniel Porter." The vote for war was unanimous. Every single representative raised their hand in favor. There was no debate. There was no discussion. Humanity had made its choice. The response across human space was immediate and overwhelming. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers within hours of the announcement. Young men and women who had never held a weapon lined up to enlist. Factory workers demanded their plants be converted to military production. Scientists abandoned their research to focus on weapons development. Artists created posters calling for unity and vengeance. Teachers told their students about Daniel Porter and his sacrifice. Admiral Christopher Grant was placed in command of humanity's combined military forces. He was a quiet man of 58 years with gray hair and a weathered face that showed decades of service in space. He had spent his career commanding small patrol fleets, never more than 12 ships at once. Now he would lead thousands. Grant understood the challenge before him. They had 10,000 years of technological advancement over humanity. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more numerous. A direct assault on their territory would be suicide. Humanity needed something else. They needed an advantage they would never expect. He called a meeting with Earth's top scientists and engineers. Among them was Dr. Adams, a brilliant physicist who had been working on theoretical propulsion systems. Her research had been considered too dangerous and unstable for practical use. Now danger and instability were exactly what humanity needed. "They will crush us if we fight them on their terms," Grant said. "I need something that changes the rules. I need something impossible." Nodded slowly. She was a small woman with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to see beyond the present moment. "I may have something," she said. "We call it the Cascade Drive. It allows for instant travel across vast distances, much faster than anything they possess." Grant leaned forward. "What is the catch?" "The energy requirements are enormous," explained, "and there are side effects. Every jump creates gravitational waves. Small jumps create small waves, but a large fleet jumping together could cause earthquakes on nearby planets. It could disrupt orbital paths. In extreme cases, it could even affect the stability of stars." Grant was silent for a long moment. He understood what was describing. A weapon disguised as transportation. "Can you make it work?" he asked. "Given enough time and resources, yes, but it will not be easy, and the risks are significant." Grant stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of Earth's cities stretching to the horizon. Billions of people were counting on him. Billions of lives depended on the choices he made in the coming months. "You have 6 months," he said. "Whatever you need you will have. Do not fail us." While Earth prepared for war, intelligence operatives worked in the shadows to understand their enemy. Agent Samuel Wright led a network of spies embedded in neutral space stations throughout the galaxy. He was a young man, only 34, but he had a talent for gathering information that others could not find. What he discovered was both troubling and hopeful. The fleet was even larger than initial estimates suggested. Their weapons were devastating. Their defenses were nearly impenetrable. A frontal assault would result in humanity's complete destruction. But Samuel also discovered something else. They had enemies. Dozens of species had been conquered and enslaved They served the Empire only because they had no choice. They hated their masters with a burning passion that had never faded despite thousands of years of oppression. Samuel sent his report to Admiral Grant with a recommendation. "These species are waiting," he wrote, "waiting to see if anyone can actually hurt them. If we can win even one significant victory, others might join our cause. We would not be fighting alone." President Santos authorized secret contact with resistance movements throughout space. Human agents slipped onto occupied worlds carrying simple messages. Humanity is coming. Freedom is possible. Hold on. 6 months passed. The Cascade Drive was completed and tested. Human shipyards launched new vessels at a rate that should have been impossible. Workers labored around the clock without complaint. Every ship was crewed by volunteers who understood they might never return home. Emma Porter, now 18 years old, enlisted in the Colonial Marines on the day applications opened. Her instructors noted her intensity immediately. She trained harder than anyone in her class. She pushed herself until she collapsed, then got up and pushed harder. She graduated at the top of her unit. When asked why she fought so hard, Emma gave the same answer every time. "My father believed in peace. He believed in the goodness of all beings. They murdered him for that belief. I will make sure his death means something. I will make sure they pay for what they did." On the day the fleet departed, Porter stood on the observation deck of Earth Station 1. She watched 3,700 ships gather in formation. Somewhere among them was her daughter, heading toward the people who had killed her husband. Had tried to convince Emma not to go. She had already lost Daniel. She could not bear to lose her daughter too, but Emma was as stubborn as her father. She believed in the mission. She believed in vengeance. "Come home," whispered as the fleet began to move. "Please come home." Admiral Grant stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolution. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built, nearly 2 kilometers long, carrying weapons and fighters and thousands of crew members. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Grant opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. His voice reached every ship, every crew member, every person who had volunteered to fight for humanity's survival. "Today we leave everything we know behind," he said. "Today we sail into darkness to face an enemy that believes we are weak. They believe we will break because we are small and young. They are wrong. We do not break. We do not surrender. We fight. We win, or we die trying, for Earth, for Daniel Porter, for freedom. Forward." The Cascade Drives activated across the fleet. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear. And then they were gone, vanishing into the void. Humanity had gone to war. The first strike came without any warning. The border fortress of Station had stood for 3,000 years at the edge of imperial space. It was a symbol of power, a warning to all who might challenge the Empire. Its weapons could destroy entire fleets. Its shields could withstand bombardment for months without failing. 50,000 soldiers called it home. It fell in 47 minutes. Admiral Grant's fleet emerged from Cascade Space inside the station's defensive perimeter. They had never seen anything like the Cascade Drive before. They did not know it was possible to travel so fast or appear so suddenly. Their outer defenses were completely bypassed. Their carefully planned defensive positions became useless in an instant. The gravitational waves from the fleet's arrival disrupted the station's artificial gravity. Soldiers stumbled and fell. Equipment crashed to the ground. Alarms screamed through every corridor as the defenders tried to understand what was happening. Human Marines breached the station's hull in 16 different locations at the same time. They poured through the gaps like water through cracks in a dam. They had trained for this exact mission for 6 months. Every corridor was memorized. Every defensive position was anticipated. They moved with speed and precision that shocked the defenders. Lieutenant Emma Porter led the assault on the station's command center. She was first through the door, her rifle blazing. The commander reached for his weapon, but Emma was faster. He died without ever understanding how humans had reached his station. The remaining fought hard, but they were overwhelmed. Within the hour, station belonged to humanity. The flag of Earth flew over its command tower. The fortress that had stood unconquered for 3,000 years had fallen to a species they considered primitive. News of the victory spread through the empire like fire through dry grass. They had not lost a major military installation in over 1,000 years. Their subjects had come to believe the empire was invincible. Now that belief was shattered. High Sovereign received the report in his private chambers. His eyes shifted through colors no one had ever seen before, finally settling on a pale, sickly yellow. He could not understand how this had happened. The humans should have been easy prey. War Minister demanded immediate retaliation. Send the Grand Fleet, he urged. Crush these insects before their rebellion spreads. Burn their worlds. Kill their people. Show the galaxy what happens to those who challenge us. But hesitated. Something was wrong. The ease of the human victory troubled him deeply. Either his advisors had been catastrophically wrong about human capabilities, or this was merely the first move in a much larger plan. He was right to worry. Over the following weeks, human forces struck at targets throughout space. They appeared without warning, their ships emerging from nowhere through the Cascade Drive. They destroyed military bases and supply depots. They attacked shipyards and fuel stations. And before reinforcements could arrive, they vanished again, disappearing into the void. They could not catch them. Their ships were fast, but the Cascade Drive was instant. By the time a fleet reached the site of an attack, the humans were already striking somewhere else. It was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. But the military attacks were only part of humanity's strategy. More damaging to the Empire were the uprisings that began on occupied worlds. They were a species that had been conquered 5,000 years ago. They had lived as slaves ever since, mining precious metals for their masters, building ships they would never fly, raising children who would know nothing but chains. But they had never forgotten what freedom felt like. And when they saw the footage of stations fall, hope stirred in their hearts for the first time in generations. Human agents had contacted the resistance months earlier. They had provided weapons, training, and most importantly, coordination. On a single night, fighters rose up across their entire planet. They destroyed their imperial garrison in hours. By morning, their world was free. The followed days later, then a dozen other species whose names humans had never heard before. The message spread through slave quarters and labor camps across the empire. The humans are coming. Freedom is possible. Rise up and fight. Admiral Grant coordinated it all from the bridge of the Resolution. He slept only 3 hours each night, sustained by stimulants and pure determination. Every attack was planned. Every uprising was supported. Every opportunity was exploited. Dr. Adams worked alongside him, constantly improving the Cascade Drive and developing new applications for its technology. She created something she called the Cascade Bomb. It used gravitational waves as a weapon instead of transportation. In theory, it could destabilize a star itself. We could end this war immediately, she told Grant one night. One bomb in the home star would destroy their entire system. Everything they have built would be gone. Grant shook his head without hesitation. Billions of innocent beings live on Prime, he said. Workers and children and people who never chose war. We are fighting for freedom, not genocide. We are better than that. Save that weapon for when we have no other choice. The war continued. Emma Porter became a legend among the liberated species. She led her Marines from world to world, freeing the enslaved and teaching them to fight. On the planet, she helped 3 million slaves rise against their masters. She fought beside them in the streets of their cities, teaching them tactics, sharing human weapons, showing them that freedom was worth dying for. After one particularly brutal battle, an elder approached her. His skin was from decades of labor. His back was bent from years of carrying heavy loads, but his eyes were bright with tears of joy. For 5,000 years we prayed for deliverance, he said. We passed stories of freedom from parent to child, but we had stopped believing they would ever come true. We had given up hope. Then your people came. You did not have to help us. We are strangers to you. Why would you fight for us? Emma thought of her father. She thought of his belief that all beings deserved dignity. She thought of his dream of a galaxy united by friendship instead of divided by fear. Because someone had to, she answered, because it was right. The elder bowed his head. From this day forward, he said, the stand with humanity. We will fight beside you until the stars themselves grow cold. Word of human compassion spread as quickly as word of human victories. They had ruled through fear for 10,000 years. They had never offered their subjects anything but chains and death. Humanity offered something different: partnership, respect, a chance for genuine freedom. Species that had been thinking about rebellion now openly joined the human cause. Ships that had served the Empire turned their weapons against their former masters. Soldiers who had fought for the defected to the other side. War Minister grew desperate. He ordered brutal reprisals against rebellious worlds. He burned cities. He massacred civilians. He thought Terra would cow the others into submission. Instead, his atrocities drove more species into human arms. Each act of cruelty created 100 new enemies. We are losing, admitted to the High Sovereign one night. Not because our weapons are weak, not because our soldiers are cowardly. We are losing because we are hated. The humans offer hope. We offer only chains. They are building an alliance. We are standing alone. Stared at his war minister with eyes that had faded to a lifeless gray. Perhaps, he said slowly, we were always destined to fall. But was not ready to surrender. There is one option remaining, he said, the ancient weapons. The ones we swore never to use again, the world enders. His eyes widened. Those weapons were sealed away for good reason. They destroyed entire civilizations during the ancient wars. We promised ourselves we would never unleash them again. Stepped closer. One strike against Earth, he said, one demonstration of absolute power. The other species will lose faith. The rebellion will collapse. Humanity will burn, and the rest will remember why they feared us. Was silent for a long time. He thought of Daniel Porter, of the human who had offered friendship instead of war. He thought of what the Empire had become under his rule. He thought of the choices that had led to this moment. Then slowly he nodded. Do it. The Worldender rose from deep beneath the surface of Prime. It had been buried there for 8,000 years, sealed in a vault that was never supposed to be opened again. The last time such a weapon had been used, 3 civilizations had been completely erased from existence. Their worlds were still radioactive wastelands, monuments to the horror of ancient wars. The ship was enormous, 5 kilometers long, shaped like a blade of black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its hull was made of materials that no living being could identify. Its weapons could crack planets like eggs. Its engines could carry it across the galaxy in days rather than weeks. Admiral Grant received word of its awakening from resistance contacts deep within the Empire. The reports were fragmentary, gathered by spies who had risked everything to send warning. But the message was clear enough. They are sending it to Earth, Grant told his command staff. If that ship reaches our solar system, everything we have fought for ends. Our planet, our people, our entire species. Gone. The fleet mobilized immediately. Every available ship was pulled back from occupation duties, liberation campaigns, and defensive positions throughout conquered territory. This was not just another battle. This was the fight that would decide the fate of humanity. Emma Porter was among those who answered the call. Her Marines were exhausted after months of continuous combat. They had lost friends and comrades on a dozen different worlds. Their bodies were covered in scars, and their eyes held the haunted look of people who had seen too much death. But they boarded their transports without a single word of complaint. Emma gathered her soldiers before departure. She looked at their tired faces and felt pride swelling in her chest. These men and women had given everything for the cause. They had earned the right to rest. Instead, they were marching toward what might be their final battle. "We knew this day would come," she said. "We knew they would try something desperate. They are losing and they know it. This is their last chance to turn the tide. We stop them here or we lose everything. There is no middle ground. There is no retreat. Today we fight for every human who ever lived and every human who ever will live." The soldiers listened in silence. Then one of them, a young corporal named whose face was covered in burned scars, stepped forward. "For Earth," he said simply. The others echoed his words, "For Earth." The human fleet gathered at the edge of space. 3,000 ships arranged themselves in battle formation, their weapons charged, their crews ready. They were not alone. Behind them came the ships of their allies, warships built from imperial salvage, cruisers armed with weapons forged in secret factories, battle carriers crewed by warriors eager for revenge. Dozens of species, hundreds of vessels, all united against a common enemy. The fleet that escorted the World-Ender was the largest concentration of military force the Empire had ever assembled. 10,000 warships surrounded the ancient weapon like a shell of metal and fire. They were confident of victory. They had numbers. They had firepower. They had the weapon that would end this war forever. Admiral Grant studied the tactical display on the Resolution's bridge. The numbers were against him. They had more ships, bigger guns, stronger shields. A direct assault would result in catastrophic losses. But the World-Ender itself was the key. Its shields were powerful beyond anything human weapons could penetrate. Its hull was nearly indestructible. The only way to stop it was from the inside. Dr. Adams had run the calculations 100 times. The Cascade bomb could destroy the World-Ender, but only if detonated within the ship's core. There was no way to deliver it by missile or torpedo. The only option was to send people inside to plant the bomb manually. "That is a suicide mission," Grant said when she presented the plan. Meta's eyes without flinching. "Yes," she said, "it is." Before Grant could respond, a communication officer spoke up. "Admiral, we are receiving transmissions from across the sector. Allied species are reporting their positions. They are asking for orders." Grant looked at the display again. More signatures were appearing every moment. Ships he had not expected. Forces that had traveled from the far corners of the galaxy to stand with humanity in this final hour. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in heavily accented English. "Admiral Grant, we have not forgotten what your people did for us. You freed our world. You gave us back our dignity. Today, we repay that debt. We stand with humanity." Similar messages came from other species. The pledged their cruisers, the swore to fight until their last breath. Even species that humanity had never directly helped sent ships. They had heard the stories. They knew what humanity represented: freedom, hope, a future worth fighting for. Grant felt something he had not experienced in months. He felt hope. "All ships, this is Admiral Grant," he said, opening a channel to the entire fleet. "Today we face the greatest threat humanity has ever known. They believe their weapon will destroy us. They believe fear will make us surrender. They are wrong. Look around you. Look at the ships beside you. Humans and fighting side by side. This is what we are fighting for. This is what we die for if we must. Not vengeance, not hatred, but a galaxy where all beings can live free. Today we make our stand. For freedom. For our families. For every being who deserves to live without chains. All ships advance. The battle began. The two fleets crashed together like waves against rocks. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Beams of energy cut through the darkness. Fighters swarmed between the larger vessels like angry insects. The scale of the fighting was beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human and allied ships engaged the escort fleet while assault teams pushed toward the world-ender itself. Every moment cost lives. Every meter gained required sacrifice. Emma Porter's transport fought through the chaos, dodging fire, weaving between burning hulks. The pilot was a woman named Grace who had flown cargo ships before the war. Now she maneuvered through hell with steady hands and iron nerves. They breached the world-ender's hull through a maintenance port that Resistance spies had identified. The ancient vessel's interior was dark and alien, built for beings that had died long before they even existed. The corridors twisted in ways that seemed to defy logic. Strange symbols covered the walls, their meanings lost to time. Emma led her Marines forward. They had partial schematics provided by Resistance contacts, but the maps were incomplete. They had to find their way through a maze while fighting for their lives. Defenders met them at every turn. The fighting was brutal and close. Marines fell one by one. Emma took wounds herself, a burn across her arm that blackened her skin, shrapnel in her leg that made every step agony, but she kept moving. She had to keep moving. The world-ender's captain was an officer named. He had served the Empire for 300 years. He had destroyed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had never known defeat. He watched the human advance with growing disbelief on his command screens. No force had ever penetrated this vessel's defenses. These creatures were supposed to be primitives. They were supposed to be easy prey. Seal all corridors, he ordered. Vent the atmosphere, kill them all. But the humans had prepared for this. Their suits were sealed. Their equipment was designed for hostile environments. They continued advancing despite everything they threw at them. Emma reached the core chamber with only 7 Marines remaining. 100 soldiers had started the assault. 93 had died along the way. The cascade bomb hung from Emma's back, heavy and waiting. The core was vast, filled with machinery that pulsed with ancient power. Energy crackled along conduits older than human civilization. At the center of the chamber stood Captain, surrounded by his personal guard. His eyes were deep red with fury. "You cannot win," he said. "Even if you destroy this vessel, the Empire will build another. We will never stop hunting your kind. Humanity will burn." Emma smiled. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye. Her armor was scorched and dented. She could barely stand, but she smiled. "You are wrong," she said. "You stopped yourselves the moment you killed my father. You showed the galaxy what you really are, murderers, tyrants, monsters, and now the galaxy is rising against you. This does not end with one ship. This ends with your entire empire." She raised her rifle. The final fight was brief and savage. Marines died. When the shooting stopped, Emma stood alone among the bodies. Every one of her soldiers had fallen. Every one of her guards lay dead. Only Emma remained, wounded in a dozen places, barely able to stay on her feet. She limped to the core and attached the cascade bomb. Her hands shook as she connected the wires. The timer display flickered to life. "Admiral Grant," she said into her communicator, "the device is in place. 3 minutes to detonation. I recommend you withdraw the fleet to safe distance." Grant's voice came back, rough with emotion. "Emma, we can send a shuttle. There is time to extract you. You can still make it out." "No, sir." Emma's voice was calm. "The detonator is damaged. I have to trigger it manually. There is no other way." Silence stretched across the communication channel. Grant wanted to argue. He wanted to order her to find another solution. but he knew there was nothing he could say. "Tell my mother I love her," Emma said. "Tell her my father would be proud." She closed her eyes and thought of Daniel Porter. She thought of the man who had believed peace was possible, the man who had died trying to build a better galaxy. "I hope you were right, Dad," she whispered. "I hope this leads to something better." She pressed the trigger. The Cascade bomb detonated with the force of a dying star. Reality itself seemed to tear apart around the world ender. Gravitational waves rippled outward, crushing everything in their path. The ancient weapon that had threatened to destroy Earth simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. The next moment there was only expanding fire and twisted metal. The explosion caught a significant portion of the escort fleet. Ships too close to the world ender were pulled apart by the gravitational distortion. Others were thrown into each other, their hulls crumpling on impact. The carefully organized formation dissolved into chaos. Admiral Grant watched the destruction from the bridge of the Resolution. His chest ached with grief for Emma Porter and the Marines who had given their lives. But there was no time to mourn. The battle was not over yet. "All ships," he commanded, "press the attack. Do not give them time to regroup." Human and Allied vessels surged forward. The fleet, suddenly leaderless and devastated, could not mount an organized defense. Their ships fought individually, without coordination, and they were overwhelmed. By the time the battle ended, the military had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. On every world, oppressed beings heard that the world ender had been destroyed. They heard that the fleet was shattered. They heard that freedom was not just possible but within reach. On Prime, High Sovereign received word of the disaster in his throne room. The great chamber that had once intimidated countless ambassadors now felt empty and cold. The nobles who had filled it were gone, fled to distant estates or hiding in fear of what was coming. His eyes shifted through colors no one had ever seen before. They moved from red to orange to yellow to green, finally settling on a dull, lifeless gray that matched the despair in his heart. War Minister was dead. His flagship had been caught in the Cascade bomb's explosion. The Grand Fleet existed only in scattered remnants. The Empire's subject species were in open revolt across every sector. Everything that had built over 10,000 years was crumbling to dust. "It is over," said quietly. His voice echoed in the empty chamber. His remaining advisors urged him to flee. They begged him to rally loyalist forces and continue the fight from exile. But the High Sovereign was tired, so very tired. He had ruled for centuries, and now he could see the end of everything his people had created. "Send a message to the humans," he ordered. "Tell them we wish to negotiate terms of surrender." The message reached President Santos on Earth, where billions of people waited in fear and hope for news of the battle. She read the words 3 times before she allowed herself to believe them. "They are surrendering," she said to her assembled cabinet. "After everything that has happened, they are actually surrendering." The peace negotiations took 6 months. Representatives from Earth, from the Empire, and from dozens of liberated species gathered on a neutral space station to forge a new galactic order. The talks were difficult. Thousands of years of hatred and oppression could not be erased overnight. Admiral Grant represented humanity's military interests at the negotiations. He was a hero now, celebrated across known space. But the weight of all those who had died under his command pressed down on him every day. He thought of Emma Porter often. He thought of her courage and her sacrifice. The final treaty dissolved the Empire completely. Its former territory was reorganized into a confederation of free systems. Each species would govern itself while cooperating with others on matters of common interest. Trade would flow freely. Knowledge would be shared. No species would rule over another. They themselves were not destroyed. They were required to make amends for oppression. They would pay reparations to the species they had enslaved. They would return artifacts and resources they had stolen. They would teach their children the truth about their history instead of the lies they had been told for generations. High Sovereign abdicated his throne in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. He stood before cameras that carried his image to trillions of beings and spoke words that no ruler had ever spoken before. "We believed ourselves superior," he said. "We believed that power gave us the right to rule over others. We believed that fear was the only foundation for civilization. The humans showed us how wrong we were. True strength comes not from domination but from unity, not from fear but from hope. We were wrong. We will spend generations making right what we made wrong." He stepped down from the throne that his ancestors had occupied for 10,000 years. He walked away without looking back. On Earth, Porter watched the broadcast alone in her living room, the same room where she had received news of her husband's death, the same room where she had begged her daughter not to go to war. Her husband was dead, her daughter was dead, but the galaxy her family had helped save was finally free. A memorial was built in Geneva, in the plaza outside the United Colonial Senate. 2 statues stood at its center, carved from white marble that seemed to glow in sunlight. Daniel Porter, the diplomat who had believed in peace even when it cost him his life. Emma Porter, the soldier who had given everything for freedom. An inscription at the base read simply, "They gave everything so that others might live free." 5 years after the war's end, a delegation of elders visited Earth. They came bearing gifts, including something precious beyond measure, a seedling from a tree that had been sacred to their species before the conquest. They had thought the species extinct, lost forever when they burned their forests. But human scientists had found preserved samples in imperial archives and worked for years to bring them back. The ambassador planted the seedling in the memorial garden, right beside the olive tree that Daniel Porter had carried to Prime so long ago. The 2 trees would grow together, their roots intertwining beneath the soil, symbols of the friendship Daniel had dreamed of building. "Your people saved us," the ambassador said to President Santos. "Not just our lives but our spirits. We were slaves for 5,000 years. We had forgotten what hope felt like. Now our children play in sunlight and they know they are free. This is because of you." Santos smiled sadly. She was older now, her hair fully gray, her face lined with years of difficult decisions. "This is because of all of us," she said. "Every species that fought, every person who refused to give up. That is the lesson we must never forget. We are stronger together than we could ever be apart." The galaxy had changed forever. The old order of conquest and domination had been replaced by something new, something fragile but precious, something worth protecting. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts and disputes. There were still old hatreds that simmered beneath the surface. Building a better future was hard work that would take generations to complete. But it was better than what had come before, and it had been bought with the blood of heroes who believed that better was possible. On the first anniversary of the war's end, a ceremony was held at the Geneva Memorial. Porter stood before the statues of her husband and daughter. Around her gathered dignitaries from 100 worlds. Former enemies stood side by side. Former slaves stood as equals. Did not speak of victory or vengeance. She spoke of love and hope and the belief that even in the darkest times, light could be found. Daniel and Emma did not fight because they hated she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. They fought because they loved humanity, because they loved freedom, because they believed every being in the galaxy deserves the chance to live with dignity. That is their legacy. That is what we must protect, not through war but through the daily work of building something better, together. The crowd listened in respectful silence. Among them stood survivors of the war from every species that had fought for freedom. They were bound together now by shared sacrifice and shared hope. They were no longer strangers. They were family. When finished speaking, the sun broke through the clouds above Geneva. Golden light fell across the memorial, illuminating the faces of Daniel and Emma Porter. Somewhere beyond the stars, Emma was watching, and she was smiling. The war was over, but the work of building a better galaxy had just begun. And every day, across 1,000 worlds, beings woke up free because a diplomat had dared to dream of peace, and a soldier had dared to fight for it. Their story would be told for generations. Parents would share it with children. Teachers would teach it in schools. And whenever the darkness seemed too deep, whenever hope seemed lost, beings would remember Daniel and Emma Porter and find the courage to keep fighting. Because that was their greatest gift, not victory, not vengeance. Hope.